The name of this poem is For the Traveler. Every time you journey, another road takes you into a world you were never in. A journey can become a sacred thing. Make sure before you go to take the time to bless your going forth, to free your heart, so that the compass of your soul might direct you toward the territories of spirit where you will discover more and the urgencies that deserve to claim you. When you travel, you find yourself in a different way, more attentive now to the self you bring along, your more subtle eye watching. You want to take in, to create a crystal of insight you could not have known you needed to illuminate your way. When you travel, a new silence goes with you. And if you listen, you will hear what your heart would love to say and do. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. May you travel safely, arrive refreshed, and live this time away to its fullest. Return more enriched and free to balance the gift of life which calls you today.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you all for coming tonight. I have been thinking about this a lot and looking forward to this for quite some time. Many of you know that in January, I started a new position with the Loretto community called Earth Education and Advocacy Coordinator. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about what that is and what I've been up to. I've been getting lots of questions about that, so we're going to get to all of that. But first, I want for us to start with a bit of imagining, a bit of remembering. I want you to think of a place on earth that you love. Maybe it's a childhood haunt, a corner of Mary's Lake, or the view of a tree from your bedroom window. Picture it in your mind. What do you see? What do you hear? Is someone with you? What are you doing? What do you smell? What do you feel? What is it that you love about that place? The place that I think of is the Guadalupe River, more specifically Guadalupe River State Park, close to where I grew up in Central Texas. We went there at least once a week during summers in my childhood. We would go swimming, go camping there. It's where I learned how to ride a bike. It's where I had my very first real scientific task of finding and cataloging salamanders. And it's now where we take my nephews when they come back to Texas from Japan. And we show them the best picnic table that will have the best shade in the afternoon. We take them to the rocks that are the best to jump off of into the river. And we show them the very best places along the limestone cliffs to find the most perfect flat, round skipping stones. So I want you to hold on to that place in your mind that you love. We're going to come back there a couple of times this evening. So on to the nuts and bolts. In January, like I said, I became the Loretto community's Earth Education and Advocacy Coordinator. This was a position that was created by our new administration. And as with any new position, it took a little while to figure out what it needs to look like right now, to see what would be most beneficial for the community. I've been working with Barbara Nicholas and Eileen Harrington in particular to go through some of those processes. And I've spent time in conversation with a variety of groups within the Loretto community to determine how this position can best serve the community at this time. My focus has been on listening, both within and beyond the community, in thinking about how can we renew and align our relationship with Earth, and how can we best collaborate with others to effectively advocate for Earth justice. So the primary sections of my job have so far fallen into three basic areas. The first is providing internal support to groups within the community. So that means being an active member on the Loretto Earth Network, the Farm and Land Committee, the Mother House Land Preservation Working Group, the Natural Burial Committee, the Mission Activities Team, and collaborating a lot with Susan Clausen, our ecosystems manager here at the Mother House. And this part of the job will, in addition to supporting those communities, will also include offering Earth education events, workshops, and retreats for all of you. So not many of those have happened so far. Some of them have. I've been working with the infirmary staff, particularly Leanne and Amanda, to think about what might be useful for the infirmary. And they've invited me to come once a quarter to do some sort of program on a Thursday afternoon. So the first one is going to be on June 27th, and it's going to be looking at how faith values align or do not align with the Green New Deal, and looking at that whole thing we've been hearing a lot about. So that's going to happen in the infirmary on June 27th. And then once a quarter, we'll continue having Earth-oriented events. Later in the summer, Maureen McCormack and I are going to start a book group for anybody here who would like to join. And we're kind of using the Mother House as a testing ground for these different events and programs, and then we'll figure out how to make them accessible to the rest of the community who does not live here in Kentucky. And we've already started some of those conversations with the Loretto Earth Network coordinators, who will be very influential in that process. The next part of the job has been building relationships and collaborating beyond the Loretto community. So beyond the community proper. So that includes working with our schools and volunteers, our staff, and other community organizations. So locally, that's been the Sustainable Lands Roundtable, New Pioneers for a Sustainable Future, the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, and then also working with other state and national organizations, particularly looking at how we can develop advocacy responses to environmental issues. And the third part of the job has been looking at the commitment that we made as a community last summer, our commitment to significantly mitigate our impact on climate change and ecological degradation, and thinking about what does that mean, and what can we do now, and what might we want to do in the future. So let's jump into climate change real quick, since we're talking about this commitment, and let's just remember where we are. Currently, only 25% of Earth's land surface is relatively free of human impact. 75% has been severely altered. Humanity currently demands nearly twice as much from Earth as what Earth can renew. So it's like we're living on the resources of 1.7 Earths. There's also something called overshoot days that I've been reading about a lot. And it's looking at, what if the whole world lived as people in a particular place live? For each year, when would we run out of resources? For the United Kingdom, if everybody in the world lived as people in the United Kingdom do, we would have completely run out of resources on May 17th. For the EU in general, for the European Union in general, we would have run out of resources on May 9th. If everyone in the world lived like those in Canada do, we would have run out of resources on March 18th. And if everyone in the world lived like those of us in the United States do, we would have run out on March 15th. That was our overshoot day this year. In addition, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are up to 409 parts per million. And just out of curiosity, does anybody know what the highest safe level of parts per million is? You'll recognize it as soon as I say it, 350. You know Bill McKibben's group, 350.org? That's where that 350 comes from. That's the safe level for carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we're currently at 409. Right now, vertebrate animal populations have declined 58% since 1970. There are currently more than 26,000 known species that are threatened with extinction, and we have no idea how many unknown species have already gone extinct or are threatened. And we know that Earth's temperature has already risen. It's already risen 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 1 degree Celsius. And we keep hearing about the 1.5 degrees Celsius or the 2 degrees Celsius. We're already at 1 degree Celsius. I know that this is a little bit small. You don't need to read all of this, but this is just to show that there is a really big difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius. Down here, it talks about the number of corals that will be bleached if we allow the temperature of Earth to rise 1.5 degrees Celsius. 90% of the coral reef is at risk. If we allow it to rise 2 degrees Celsius, 98% of the coral reef is at risk. And none of the rest of this is any more encouraging. So the bottom line, climate change is happening. It's dangerous, it's real, it's caused by us, and we need to respond really quickly. That's basically what we need to know. The IPCC report that came out this year, they're like the highest scientific group that looks at the climate and tells us how we're doing. They're telling us that we now have until 2030 to slash emissions by 45%. By 45% by 2030, that's less than 12 years. And then by 2050, we have to reach net zero. We have to, in order to keep emissions, in order to keep the temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial standards. So that's where we are. How do you feel? Turn and talk to your neighbor for just 20 seconds. How do you feel? Okay, so if you're on Zoom and you want to respond to this, just as we're shouting out answers, feel free to unmute yourself and respond, and then go ahead and mute yourself again. But for those of you here, I'm not going to take time to pass the microphone around. Just shout it out, and I will repeat it so everybody can hear. How do you feel knowing where we are? Frightened, scared, overwhelmed. Awful, ashamed, guilty, challenged. Anybody feel good? Me either. Felt that way. Ava said, if we join with like-minded people, we can make a difference. I think you're right. And sometimes it's hard for me to remember that. The most common responses to climate change are shock, disbelief, fear, anger, guilt, powerlessness, and despair. So we're right there with everybody else. And that can lead to real problems. That can lead to anxiety and grief and depression. We can lose sight of who we are. We can lose sight of the future that we thought we were going to have. And we can feel really isolated from family and friends, both physically and emotionally. So this is not easy stuff. It's also really easy to get defensive and to view the realities of climate change as a criticism of our personal lifestyles and habits. And in some ways, that's what's happening. It's kind of like the earth is holding up a mirror to us and allowing us to see our lifestyles for what they are. At the same time, we all just happened to be born into societies and systems that were already broken. We didn't create these systems, but we are part of them. So in the face of all of this, I think it's really easy to see why sometimes people fail to act. I don't think it's because we're selfish or unwilling, but because we feel powerless, because the things that are wrong are part of complex social and political systems, and because we as individuals have competing desires. I desire to reduce, or better yet, eliminate my carbon footprint. I also desire to see my parents who live in Texas, to see my sister who lives in Japan, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law and niece who live in Germany, and the rest of my in-laws who live in Colorado. And it's not easy to get any of those places without using fossil fuels. And I know that even if I were somehow able to deal with all of these competing desires that are painful and difficult, I know that even if I altered my life so that I was at carbon zero and I had no carbon footprint anymore, that alone would not change much in the grand scheme of things. These are really difficult truths to face, and yet this is where we find ourselves today. I'm not saying all of this to make us even more depressed. There's a whole new sector of psychology that has arisen as a result of climate change. And there's an organization that I have found called the Climate Psychology Alliance. And they are doing a ton of work in what people need emotionally and psychologically in order to deal with the realities of climate change, which are hard, and in order to move through them. And they have found that it's not more information that people need. It is a supportive and cooperative community who will say, we're going to face these difficulties together, we're not going to shy away from the truth, and we're going to support each other as we move through them. And so I found that encouraging because I think that we already have that built into who we are. And so if that's what people need most, great, we've got it. Now we can go. So go now in your mind back to the place that you love. What does it mean to love this place today, knowing what we know? What does it mean to love the world, perhaps beyond our capacity to save it? Because the truth is that we aren't going to save all of these places that we love. In some of them, too much damage has already been done. Communities have already been devastated. Species have been lost. And places have been desecrated. But I believe that it is here in our response to the question of how we love the world, particularly beyond our capacity to save it, that we as a faith community have a unique voice. Our response arises from a radically different worldview to that which created this problem. We're not approaching this crisis from a position of fighting, of creating more separation, or of trying to dominate. We're drawing on our history as Loretto, our foundation of working for justice and acting for peace. We are taking up the mantle of those who have gone before us and deepening our commitment to stand in solidarity with Earth. As a community whose entire frame of being is grounded in spirituality, we can look at the seriousness and the urgency of the climate crisis and offer an empowering voice of hope over fear, of compassion over indifference, and of urgent and fair action as a moral obligation. We have done this before. We have said we will only offer hope, not fear. We will offer compassion and not indifference. Religious communities have long offered that personal witness alongside political action to be examples in the world that we can and want to change. I've been reminded recently of the abolitionist movement and the role that the Quakers played in that movement in particular. And I was told about how if the Quakers had just said, okay, we are not going to participate in having enslaved people anymore, and we're going to let all of these people that we have enslaved go free, that would have been good. That would have been the right thing to do, but it wouldn't have been enough. And so they rallied, and in addition to holding that personal witness, they engaged in political advocacy and helped bring down the system. Ecological privilege is legal. It's entirely legal. And so therefore we have to regulate ourselves. And in doing so, we have the capacity to recognize that privilege. And by recognizing that we are part of the problem, we open ourselves up to the possibility of being part of the solution. At no other time in history has anybody had the knowledge that we have about climate change. And that gives us this power and this privilege. So the question is, what are we going to do with it? So now, I want to introduce you to one of my new favorite young women, in case you haven't been introduced to her. Her name is Greta Thunberg, and many of us heard of her for the first time after she spoke to the UN last December. She was 15 at the time. She's now 16. And you may have heard about all of the students that are striking and leaving school on Fridays. They're calling it Fridays for Future. They're striking for climate justice. Their basic principle is, why should we go to school and learn facts if we don't have a future? And if you don't do something about climate change, we're not going to have a future. Greta started sitting outside the Parliament building in Sweden on Fridays by herself. And this is now a worldwide movement. It's happening all over Europe, all over Africa, Central and South America. It's happening here in the United States. There have been strikes. The closest one to us that I can find is in Louisville, but there were enormous strikes last Friday. Some students leave every Friday. And they're saying, until you do something about climate change, we are not going to school on Fridays. So we're going to hear from Greta for just a moment. So let me run back there.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of Climate Justice Now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. You have run out of excuses, and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
I'm so grateful for Greta's courage and articulation and clear sight with which she sees things and can speak. So now that we've heard Greta, I want us to take a minute and think, what is our response? How can we respond to the Gretas of the world, knowing what we do in the position that we are? Go ahead and take another minute to think and talk to the people around you. This is a really big question that I've asked you to consider in a very short amount of time. And this is just the beginning of a conversation that I think we will continue having for quite a while. But right now, I would like to just hear, what are some of our initial thoughts? Mary has a traveling mic in the round and will be, she has a traveling mic in the back and will be running around for anyone who wants to share. And again, if you're on Zoom and you would like to share, please just unmute yourself and do so. What can our response be to people like Greta?
That's right. You know, in thinking about these things myself, and I get so frustrated with so little I can do. And one of the things I just want to say, there is nothing too little. And so one of the things I can do is give some of the money that I spend on myself, which is a little amount, but you know, in terms of the problem, but I can give that to some people who are working in this organization that need funding for their advertising and stuff. So that's one thing I can do.
Well, last year when I was living in a community that this was very, very important, and each month we took something like, you know, saving electricity, and, you know, not plugging in your computer all the time, and all of those little things that save a lot of electricity if you don't do it. And the reason, okay, so now I'm here, and in one way, I have the same support of the community in my head, but not in practice. And so maybe that would be something to, you know, to kind of pick something every month, or, and then, you know, because what we found last year, that we were doing what we did every month. By the time we got to the end of the year, we were doing that. What we did at the first of the month, you know, the first time that we did, so.
I think we might be able to get better at using Zoom and have more meetings on Zoom. That might help a lot. The other thing here at the Mother House is I'm thinking if we could be more organized around trips. If somebody's going to Walmart, maybe we can organize 2 trips a week to Walmart for everybody. Maybe we can also get together and do car trips. If they're wellness medical trips, instead of one person going by themselves, if 3 people have the same kind of appointment, we'd have to wait for each other, but we might be able to organize that and have less car trips. It takes some doing, and it takes waiting for each other, but it might be worth it.
Maybe just what Mary Kay said about the computers and unplugging them. Maybe that's just one place where we could start.
I often think about water, and it's so easy to waste water. And sometimes I think somebody would die for that little bit of water I just poured down the sink.
I think also hanging our clothes out to dry instead of using the dryer. And at the apartments, we have clotheslines, but even in your own room, if you have a rack, you can dry your clothes out. And someone took my little blue plaid bags that I had for recycling when you went to the store. So I'll put a sign out to have them return them, and so we can continue using them.
I was thinking about how easy it is for me if I discover that I don't have milk, that I had the last of my milk this morning. It would just be very easy for me to get in the car and go to some nearby store and get some more milk. And I've made myself be aware that really, I don't really need a drink of milk right this minute. I'm going to be in a store tomorrow. I can get it tomorrow. And it's just a way of recognizing that, that I have some control over some use of resources, paying attention.
I work with a group of people that don't really have this on their minds very much. They're trying to survive. They're trying to change the way they live. But I see all kinds of things, waste going on around me. I can't preach about it. I can't lay down the law about it, but I do talk from the heart about it. I tell them why it's important for me not to buy bottled water. And they listen. They listen. I give it to them in a way that makes sense to them. And I don't know that they change, but they do seriously listen. Somebody will be taking a long shower and I'll comment on it. You know, why that's would be very, very, I wouldn't do that. I mean, the present consciousness, well, what kind of consciousness do you have? Then I go all the way back to the beginning, you know. Another thing is starting cars on cold mornings. I say, I can't bring myself to do that. I come all the way from wherever I come from in a cold car because I don't want to turn the heat on. And those cars out there, you know, you're heating them up to go a couple of blocks to go home. That's, you know, that just breaks my heart to see you do that. So I don't get any tomatoes thrown at me or anything like that. They do hear me. I don't know if any changes come, but they do hear me.
I can't tell you how many times I pass rooms and turn off light switches, and I don't know if I'm bothering people by doing that or not, but I do it all the time. And I would like to remind people, please, to turn off your lights when you leave your rooms.
These are all great ideas, and I thank you, and I've written them all down. So we have them. We made this commitment last summer to significantly mitigate our impact on climate change and ecological degradation. And I think that we all see the need for that, and we're all wanting to do that and willing. So the question is, where do we begin? I have this quote from St. Francis all over my life now. It's right in front of my desk, at home, in my office. You start by doing what's necessary, then you do what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. We have a strong foundation in Loretto. that we are building on. This is not a new awareness for us. It's a deeper awareness, but we have a strong foundation. I spent some time earlier this month talking with Marlene about the Denver Solar Array. This is the 8th year that that array has been functioning. And I had the number of kilowatt hours that that array accounts for. So I did a few calculations. And it's the same as taking 36 cars off the road every year, or it produces the same amount of energy. If you think about it in terms of emissions, it's the equivalent to the amount of carbon that would be sequestered by 200 acres of forest. So that one solar array is doing a lot. We have solar installations all over Pakistan. We have solar at St. Mary's and in many other places of which I am not aware. We have planted gardens. We have changed light bulbs. We have reduced our use of plastic, and where we can't reduce it, we have recycled. We have made dietary changes, and we have completely divested from fossil fuels. Those are not tiny things. Those are good things. So we are just continuing on this road. And the same is true of our advocacy efforts. I doubt that at the very beginning, when there were inklings of this pipeline, I doubt that many people thought, we got this, no problem. We'll get it stopped completely. But you start with what's necessary, and then you do what's possible, and suddenly you're doing the impossible. We've done it before, and we can do it again. So when I really started thinking about this proposal that we passed, and what does this commitment look like, at my first meeting with the forum, I said, I don't want to think about this alone. I want a group to think about this with me. And of course, this is not a group that has any decision-making power. This is a thinking group. And we will bring ideas to the community and get lots of feedback and lots of input and hear tons of creative ideas to collectively figure out how are we going to live into this. I intentionally chose one person from each of our major geographic locations. So we have Lisa Reynolds from Denver, Pilar Gonzalez from El Paso, Kathy Sullivan from St. Louis, Kathleen Vonderhaar here at the Mother House. And then I wanted someone who's not in one of those particular areas to keep reminding us, what if we don't live in a place that has regular meetings? So we have Carol Eschen in Kansas City, and then we have Sue Kenny as our liaison to the forum. So if you hear us talking about an Earth Advocacy working group, this is who it is. And we are thinking about and trying to help figure out what's a step that the community can take now, and where do we need a lot more input, where do we need more discernment processes, and what are steps that we need to work towards in the future. So the next thing that I did is I looked at what are other religious communities doing. And I'm going to give you the question first. The question is, what can we learn from the steps that other faith communities have taken? And other faith communities have taken a lot of steps. The Sisters of Charity of Nazareth made a commitment, just straight up decided, we're going to be carbon zero, so no carbon emissions at all by 2037 in the US and in Belize. They will have the same goal for 2047 for India, Nepal, and Botswana. They don't know how they're getting there. They made the goal and said, we're going to do what it takes to get there. So in the meantime, they're purchasing carbon offsets to account for their emissions. They've made a commitment to be a zero waste campus. That means nothing goes to the landfill. They're not there yet, but they're working on it. Everything will be recycled or composted. They are doing their very best to only purchase electric and hybrid cars. They have installed on-demand hot water heaters, and I believe they have now completely changed all of their light bulbs to LEDs. And I love this. They've created idle-free and plastic-free zones on their different campuses. So they have little signs saying, for the health of the environment and of us, this is an idle-free zone, so cars cannot idle there. And they have plastic-free zones as well. It's one of those things that just helps raise our awareness. The Christian Church Disciples of Christ committed to being completely carbon neutral by 2030 and then carbon positive by 2035. So that means they're actually sequestering carbon at that point. Not only are they not putting out any emissions, but they're drawing carbon down from the atmosphere. The Sisters of Providence of St. Mary of the Woods made the commitment to collectively reduce their carbon emissions by 2 million pounds by next month, or day after tomorrow. So I don't know how they're doing on this. I've been following their progress, and I'm really excited to see how this went. The Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati made a commitment to recognize their relationship with Earth as a guiding consideration for all of their decision making. So they did not say we're going to be carbon zero or carbon neutral by a certain date. They made that value statement. And the first thing that they did was they hired a company to come in and do a complete energy audit of their main property in Cincinnati. And they've done a great job of equating their reductions in emissions with what that looks like in other areas. So I'll share just a couple of those with you. They have replaced 10,000 incandescent light bulbs with LEDs. That's the same as, well, that saves them $62,000 annually, because LEDs are so efficient. Even the cost of buying the light bulb, the payback is almost instantaneous now. They replaced their kitchen ventilating hood with a more efficient one, and that saves them about 25,000 kilowatt hours per year. They've installed a small geothermal system, not for their whole campus, but just for a few houses, and that is the same as planting 222 tree seedlings. So they've really done a lot of work in helping people understand what difference it makes in terms of Earth. So we have these wonderful examples and many more of which I am unaware, or of which we just don't have time to go over all the great things that our friend communities are doing. What can we learn from the steps that other faith communities have taken? If it's a short answer, shout it out. If it's a long answer, wave your hand. Encouragement. Copy it. Borrow their ideas. Put the ideas on the bulletin board and leave them there. Congratulate them. Just start somewhere. Plant more trees. Do a solar installation like in Denver.
The amount of paper we use, Loretto community, every month it's like, I wonder how many trees we got rid of.
Wouldn't that be a calculation?
Yeah, so
for
I
us
think
to do?
that's a challenge for us, because it is important to get the communication, but the amount of it is humongous.
She was saying really look at the amount of paper that we use in the community. So we made this commitment at Assembly last year, recognizing the violence against Earth that intensifies the suffering of people on the margins, as well as present and future generations of all species. The Loretto community commits to significantly mitigate our impact on climate change and ecological degradation. We did not make a goal of reducing our carbon footprint by a certain amount. That is one part of the commitment that we made, but that is not the only piece. What we did is we made it more difficult, where there aren't easy answers, and it can't just be solved by checklists. We made this value statement that is quite broad, actually. Pope Francis speaks to this, the breadth of this, very clearly in Laudato Si, when he says climate change is a global problem with grave implications that are environmental, social, economic, and political. So as we look at our own role in this crisis, we will need to untangle that complex web of social forces, of practical constraints, and of individual desires. We'll have to uncover what we think about a future that's likely to look vastly different than what we thought it would. We may need to rethink some of our values and look at how we understand justice. And I think this is really important. As we try to make changes, we need to accept that at times we're going to make progress and at times we're going to fall back. We may respond defensively. We may feel anxious or hopeless. We may wonder if it's worth it. We all have our blind spots, our passions, our obstinate sticking points. But understanding those difficulties and complexities and working with them, with each other, is what's going to help us be able to really move forward. So I looked for a framework that would take everything into account that we committed ourselves to. And my guiding question became, what framework can we establish that will systematically consider the logistics of our operations, so all of the practical implications, as well as inform our spiritual and ecological understandings as we evolve in solidarity with Earth. We need this to work for individuals and for campuses. We need it to work for the Loretto community and anybody else who wants to join with us in our work. So what I found that I really liked is the Green Ribbon Schools framework. I found this from Nerinx High School. They're already working to be sort of certified as a Green Ribbon School. It's not a tracking system. It's not a system where the government comes in and helps you do this. It's simply a framework by which schools know what they need to work on and can show progress. And once they've shown a certain amount of progress, then they can apply for this award. So I took this to the Earth Advocacy Working Group and said, what do you think? I took it to the forum and said, what do you think? And everybody said, it's something. We can start with it. We don't know if it's gonna meet all of our needs, and that's fine. We're making this up as we go. We just have to start somewhere. So there are 3 pillars to the Green Ribbon School framework. I like to think of it more as a circle. So the first part includes reducing environmental impacts and costs. The second part has to do with environmental health and wellness. And the third part has to do with environmental and sustainability education. So that first part of reducing environmental impacts and costs, that is where absolutely everything comes in that you think of in terms of a carbon footprint. All of those commitments that the other communities made would all fall under this first section. So all of our energy usage, electricity, gas, flights, everything, all of that energy usage falls under here. Our water and grounds, how much water do we use? Is our landscaping and land management appropriate for where we are? All of those questions are included in this. Looking at our waste, all of it is included in this, our transportation, and then we added purchasing on that, knowing that we purchase a lot for the logistics of our community, and looking at that makes an impact, and what can we do with our purchasing to stand more in solidarity with Earth. The second piece is environmental health and wellness. And so this would look very different for a school than it would look for us, but this is the list that the Earth Advocacy Working Group has come up with so far. It includes looking at all of those elements of environmental health, air quality, water quality, those sorts of things. But then we added the health of our food systems from beginning to end, from grower, from how the food is grown, to how it gets to us, to what's on our plate, looking at the health of those food systems, looking at the health of our ecosystems, looking at environmental justice across the world and wherever we are, recognizing the impacts of what our lives are doing to others around the world, looking at holistic health, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically. What is our health as human beings? Having connection with the natural world and recognizing the sacred in all, and increasing our outdoor earth-oriented rituals. And then the third piece is that environmental and sustainability education. And we thought that's just going to be blanket underneath whatever else we do, because there's so much that we need to learn with all of this. So I think it's pretty clear that this is not something that's going to be done in a year or ever. But it's a framework that we can look at where we can say, this is everything we need to deal with, and we're going to get to all of it. But we can start with one piece. We don't have to tackle all of it tomorrow. Our commitment is to really examine all of this. A couple of things that I like about this is that it allows that balance between modifying our own actions and advocating for systemic change so that we can do both of those simultaneously. It also models a process that anybody else can join in. I've talked with our schools already about the fact that we're using this framework, and they're really excited because we can work on the same items at the same time. Even though it looks different in each location, we can work on it collaboratively together. And it allows us to approach this incrementally, like I said, so we can really look at what can we do now and what do we need to plan for to do in the future. So I know it's a big question, and I know that I've thrown a lot at you, but is there anything off the top of your head that you think we've missed? Is there something else that we should include? Go ahead and think about that and talk about that for a second, and then Mary will run around with the mic again. In the interest of time, I'm going to pause you where you are. And again, we're looking at what have we missed? What else do we need to include from the get-go in this framework? Shout it out or raise your hand. Marion's got her hand raised here.
I think I do right now is I am fortunate to live with enormous windows, and they look out onto absolutely beautiful magnolia trees, which currently are having big, huge white flowers there. But they, besides that, for the last month, they have housed several, 2 or 3 little nests of amazingly vocal birds. And I think to celebrate and thank God and to thank the Loretto and thank all those who have taken care of those 2 trees for years, so that during this past month, I have been able to enjoy what I have been able to enjoy. But I think that it's like, it's another way of keeping things. It's just that, you know, do our praise as we walk and see these various beautiful, you know, parts of our world and other parts of the world. It's just, so I am grateful for them, and I want the trees and all them to know that, and the birds too.
Perhaps doing something to get the surgent message to the broader community beyond Loretto.
I was thinking that maybe we could really look at our diet and think more in terms of eating more vegetables and less meat.
I was thinking about your slide there, that where the top says the green ribbon schools. I like that you took the framework from there, but what if we thought of ourselves as a green ribbon community? That I can relate to that as an individual, and we can in any of our places. And you know, who knows, it could become a way we say ourselves, but just a suggestion.
2 things. One, I just noticed now, do we have enough wind for these windmill things?
I don't know, but it's such a pretty picture.
Yeah, anyway, but it's a thought. Anyway, I still think that we need a bulletin board that is available, a large bulletin board that's available to the whole community, infirmary, and all the rest of us. Maybe out in the entryway, I don't know, where all this information is there, where we can see it and go back to it and keep moving with it.
For you artistic people, I will be calling on you to help create that.
And we could really think about the LED lights. I mean, that hasn't happened here.
Some has. Some lights have been replaced.
Yeah, right. But I mean, the whole general thing, because of the amount of electricity that's saved, it's a cost to buy the lights. And then I don't know what you do with the ones you take out. Do you give them to people who are still using them. I thought about
That's
that.
a good question.
And even solar panels. I don't know if solar panels could be put on the roof of the infirmary. I mean, there's a big flat space.
So the first step, what do we do? I was with Mary Berry, who's Wendell Berry's daughter, yesterday, and she referenced this several times. She said, Daddy is always saying, if you don't do the small work that's right in front of you, then you're not fit to do the big work. That's what our friend down the road, Wendell Berry, says. So the work that's right in front of us is our waste. And the reason that the Earth Advocacy Working Group chose waste is because the infirmary has already asked me to go over and look at their recycling system with them. And I've done that. And we've got some new forms of recycling that are already happening. So waste includes possibly doing a waste audit of this entire campus. Individuals can also do a waste audit of their own waste in their own home. It would possibly include field trips to the recycling center and to the landfill. I've gotten a lot of questions about what's actually being recycled now that China is no longer taking plastics. I don't know. And I've asked other people in the county and they don't know. And everybody says you've just got to go there and figure it out. So I think it's incumbent on us to go there and figure it out. And looking at green cleaning and hazardous waste, I've already been talking with the cleaning staff about the products that they use and what they've already transitioned away from and what their desires are in what they want to transition to. For those of us in our own homes, this is just as important. So we decided the first thing that we're going to do is look at waste. Some of those successes that we've had, I think this is huge. We now have a place that's taking all of our used mattresses from the infirmary and reusing them. So we no longer are throwing away mattresses. We have found a place that will recycle styrofoam, not like styrofoam food containers, but styrofoam packaging when you order something and it's in those, styrofoam blocks. Ideally, I'd love for that to be part of our advocacy, where we're trying to work with our providers saying we don't want to purchase items that come in styrofoam. We want to purchase items that come in that molded cardboard, but a step at a time. It's a process to recycle styrofoam. We have to mail it off and have it done at a plant in Indiana. But that's something that I've talked with the infirmary about, and they're willing to do that, to take responsibility for that part of our waste, which I think is amazing. And they ought to be, the staff in the infirmary should really be congratulated for that. Another thing that I have found a way to completely recycle is any kind of fabric. So for those of you on Zoom here at the Mother House, I told people to bring anything that they wanted, any sort of fabric item that you would like to be rid of, but you're too embarrassed to donate it. Maybe it's an old pair of underwear that you just can't get rid of, or a sock that no longer has a mate, or it's been darned too many times. We have this beautiful basket that Angela loaned us just for the evening that's made of plastic bags. So this beautiful basket. So to encourage us to start looking at, that's one little thing that we can do. Any of that stuff that we would typically throw out instead of putting on the free table because it's past its prime. We will have a new spot for it, and I will mail it off to these clothing companies that take it and make beautiful things out of it. So there's no longer any need to throw away anything that's fabric, which I think is pretty cool. So we've got some items on the table over here. I'll put the basket over there as you leave. If you have items, drop them in. If you don't have items with you, I will get that spot set up. I'll talk with Renee about that tomorrow and get a spot set up real soon. There will be more resources for individuals coming about waste very soon. And in terms of here at the Mother House, one thing that we really want to emphasize is that there's going to be so many different ways for people to get involved. If you're a nuts and bolts person and doing a waste audit and going through bags and bags of trash is exciting to you, great. This is your chance. If that does not sound exciting to you and you think, I really want to look more at the intersections between environmental justice and economic justice, great. You can do that. So what we'll do here at the Mother House is in the next couple of weeks, We'll have a separate meeting for anybody who's interested in helping figure out how to really look at the waste here on this campus. We'll hold a meeting here in the conference room, Kathleen and I will, and we will figure out who wants to help be part of the waste audit, who wants to help report on recycling, and get all of that taken care of. And at the same time, we'll be making all of these resources to send out to people in other areas who are doing this on their own. One thing that we're really trying to figure out is how do we bring our information back together so we can really celebrate what we're doing as a community. So quickly in your mind, go back to that place that you love. Knowing what we know, what does it mean to love the world today? What does it mean to love the world beyond our capacity to save it? I want us to keep coming back to this question as we really dive into this, because I think it's so grounding for me, this idea of how do we love the world beyond our capacity to save it? I'm sure there are lots of questions. Are there any that anybody wants to raise now? Questions, comments? You've had great ideas and I really appreciate that.
Maybe your mic's alive. I had one thought. Like when I think about employees, the employees, except for you, are younger than we are. And so they've got children often. And so this whole idea about the future, is there a future for their children? I'm wondering if you could do a smaller piece of this for them or talk to Michelle about it, because they do in-service things to get them on board with the kind of background you're giving us.
Other questions, comments, suggestions? Thank you all. I am really excited to be doing this work with this community. I would not want to be doing it anywhere else. So here we go. Have a good night.